Cool, so I'm Peter. Area 1 Security is a company that protects some of the world's largest organizations from cyber attacks. And so I'm going to talk to you today about cybersecurity, data, and perspective. And I think the last point there is the most important. And I'm going to ask you to think of three things at the beginning of this. One, what is like the internet, like really, at the end of the day? Two, what do you guys think cybersecurity is? What's a hacker? Like, what's an attack? What does that mean? And three, I guess, how do you approach the data science problem, right? How do you approach machine learning? And so we're actually going to begin here in 1986 at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Clifford Stoll, who was a system administrator there, was asked by his supervisor to account for a 75-cent computer usage accounting error. And so he spent a long time on it and traced it back to 9 seconds of unauthorized access. And then he spent 10 months on that problem and traced that back to a hacker in Germany named Hunter, who was knocking over American corporations and national laboratories and selling secrets to the KGB. And Hunter used a variety of software vulnerabilities to knock over these organizations. He would exploit things in the mail programs that would give him administrator access on machines. He would exploit policies at telecom companies to hide his traffic overseas. He would leave Trojan horses on the machines he infected and use those to pull password files and then take them back to home base and brute force them. And what's fascinating about his playbook isn't that it like sounds impressive, because it kind of does. Like Trojan horses are sexy and like, you know, that sounds cool. But like none of it's really impressive. Reading through what he actually did, it's all incredibly simple. And Cliff Stoll, the system administrator, actually wrote a book about the events called The Cuckoo's Egg, which I recommend everyone read because it's kind of cool. But what was remarkable to me about that book wasn't the hacking, because that was simple, right? And the strategy was simple. It was how intensely human it was, right? Like it was about people, right? The whole campaign was about people and exploiting people. And so I want to meditate on that for a minute, because this was at the beginning of the internet in 1986. And so what has the internet become since then? Well, the internet at ground root is a series of tubes that Al Gore invented that can take words from one machine and give them to another machine at the speed of light. Right? And either consciously or unconsciously, we as a collective engineering community, as a collective people, have identified that like really the internet is just talking at a distance, right? Talking at the speed of light. And like if you really map down to all of human society, that's just communication and talking, right? It's the transfer of ideas. And so if you look at what's happened over the past 30 years with the internet and cyberspace, you see that really we've just mapped different aspects of who we are as a people onto this super flexible, super fluid medium. And so texting replaces talking to people. Facebook replaces knowing people. Instagram replaces seeing people. Tinder replaces some stuff. And cyber attacks replace robbing banks, right? They replace taking something that isn't yours. And the security industry is probably one of the more successful failures in business history. Over the past 30 years, we've spent billions of dollars on it. And still every day we read New York Times articles about some new someone getting knocked over, you losing all your personally identifiable information, you lose your credit card, you can't see the new Seth Rogen movie. Like all these things happen seemingly every day. And we have this massive industry there that's supposed to protect us. And the reason they can't is kind of should be apparent, because the internet is people, right? And it's not just people in the sense that it's people talking, like that's all it is, right? It's people writing it too. I write the code. I, despite my mother says, am not perfect. I am a phenomenal failure. And people like me are fallible, right? We're the ones who are theoretically supposed to protect you, but we can't write code that's perfect, right? And so all code has bugs. There's an estimate out there that 1 in every 1,000 lines is going to have a bug, right? There are billions or trillions of lines of code supporting you staying alive right now, right? We can directly map life expectancy to internet access at this point. And so those trillions of lines of code written by the couple million people who have written it in the past 30, 40 years, those all have bugs, and those are all vulnerable, right? You can't have a perfect technological solution to the security problem. There's no way to do it. But humans being humans, we form analogies. We make metaphors, right? And the metaphors we put online, like Facebook, are the same as the metaphors that the security industry uses in general to try to protect us. So this is kind of like what the industry looks like right now. And over here on the left, we have the attackers, and they shoot red bullets at the bad guys. And the bad guys, or the good guys rather, sorry. Those are the bad guys. They also probably shoot each other at points, but I don't know. And then the good guys have these, all these devices, right? Firewalls, proxies, AV things, internal firewalls. They have all these devices. And really, all those are walls, right? Like, the technological metaphor here is like, if we build a big enough wall, no one will get in. And despite what some presidential candidates may say about that, people are still going to get in. It's not a really good working solution to any sort of problem. And it's a flawed metaphor, right? You can't have a technological solution. You can't build a perfect wall, right? And we can't build perfect software. We can't build perfect code that's going to serve as these walls. It's just not going to happen, right? And it kind of misses the point, right? It sees the internet as this piece of technology when really the internet is a nexus of relationships between people, right? So this is the audience interaction portion. I want you to close your eyes. I'm watching. And I want you to imagine you're at a lake house, and a few hundred meters in front of you, there's a serene lake reflecting the clouds that look like spilled milk on blue linoleum. And to your right, there's a meadow that the breeze gently brushes. And you hear crickets. Your hand is wrapped around that of someone you love. And your phone buzzes. And it's a text from your mother, ruining this perfectly serene moment. And it reads, I just read on the news that Target got hacked. Is my credit card in danger? Am I in danger? Should we run? And a few thoughts go through your mind right now. One is, dang it, Mom, please don't ruin this moment for me. Two is, does she need to get a new credit card? Three is, have I shopped at Target lately? And then when you get to 8 or 9, you may wonder, who actually knocked over Target and why? And so I want you to picture who you think conducts a cyber attack, right? Who does that? Like, what seedy basement do you see them in? What supervillain's there? And now I want you to open your eyes. This is Oren, the guy who was supposed to give the talk. Oren was formerly at the NSA, and I'm glad the ethics talk was before me. And Oren did stuff like this. This is what these guys look like, right? They're dudes, they're guys. They like cheese balls. They're people, And regardless how sophisticated the attacker is, regardless who they are, they're just people, This is people competing against people to try to steal things from other people, right? Like, the technology doesn't really matter, right? This is like this is the oldest problem in the book, So let's look at how one of these attacks actually works. So this is a targeted attack that we tracked over the course of a few months against a massive multinational organization. And over here on the left, the attacker starts scanning domains. So that means the attacker's doing reconnaissance against the organization's infrastructure, but the attackers are also performing research, right? They're finding out who works there, who they care about, what meetings they may have been to, what conferences they may go to. And some point over here, the attackers sent someone an email. Sending an email with a malicious payload is generally called phishing. It's one of the things we care most about at Area 1. And in that email was an attachment that someone downloaded, and it put something on, and then they opened it, which is always a mistake. Never open anything that you download. And at this point, that payload went out to the internet again and downloaded something else. Now, like, that may seem overcomplicated, but there's a lot of good reasons attackers do it, which I'm not going to get into. And then it kind of just hung out. At that point, right there, the attacker has unrestricted access to the machine they infected as well as the network, because generally intra-organization networking isn't really that secure, And then on April 6, 7, exfiltration starts. So exfiltration is taking data away from the organization, right? And then over the course of 94 days, they steal 7 gigs. Now, I know that 7 gigs doesn't seem like a lot of data, but you have to imagine that a lot of the data that really matters in the world is text, like pure text, right? It's not photos. Like, you may think it is for you, but like it's really not, right? The world runs on text. And so 7 gigs of text is a ton. That's probably like Shakespeare times 2, right? That's like a lot of meat. That's like everything on my phone. I have a 16 gig. It's awful. You should never do that. But you'll notice that the exfiltration stage of this campaign takes months, right? And it's not really because they couldn't do it all in one go. Like, obviously they could. They could like package up 7 gigs of data and send it out. It's because these guys are people. And like, they don't really have time to like go get more stuff every day. They have like other responsibilities. Like, the attackers, this is their full-time job. Like, what they do is they go to work at 9 a.m., hack people, steal things from people, and then they go home and like, watch The Apprentice or whatever. So like, these are people. And what you'll notice about this attack is kind of that the flow and the stages in the kill chain here are largely the same as what I described Hunter doing earlier, right? They deliver a payload, and then they pull stuff off over time. They leave themselves doors in. And what we really care about isn't any of this stuff, because that stuff, like it's a sunk ship, right? We care about right here, and we care about right here, because that's where you can actually do something to prevent an attack. And one of the reasons that these things look the same, this attack and the attack that Hunter performed 30 years ago, is prescription, right? So groups of people form cultures. Like, we know this, right? And cultures are these prescriptive buckets of ideas. They're like these intertwining ideas about how you ought to act, how you ought to conduct yourself, right? Religion and mysticism are like ideas about how you ought to interact with the world, what different things mean for you, right? It's a script you follow. Capitalism is probably the most powerful prescriptive force in the world right now. It defines how we relate to each other in the economy and like relate to each other otherwise, right? The whole ideology of capitalism infects all your thinking about all your relationships with everything. Pop music right now follows a script, right? There are 6 Scandinavian guys, I think, who write every pop song, or like half the top 40. That's like a true fact. Like search The Atlantic. They had a great article about it. But there's weight to these ideas, right? There's weight to these cultural norms. There's weight to the scripts we learn to follow, because they're effective, right? Capitalism as a system is effective, right? Way back when, shamanism was believed to be like an effective means of bringing the rain to come or making the boogeyman go away, right? Like, they exist and they govern us. They draw us to something because they seem to work, And for cyber attacks, that's the same thing, right? They're following a script. They have a set of behaviors that they've identified as effective, And so our guys and their guys, they do it the same way, right? because it works, right? And it's unchanging, right? There's a sort of weight to the ideas, right? The ideas have a specific gravity, and like if they didn't work, they would die out, right? Which is Darwinism, and then it's Dawkins and the selfish gene, where these are cultural memes that exist and percolate and like keep going. And then it's actually Kevin Kelly in his book, What Technology Wants, which, you know, he argues that, you know, technological forces, the ideas that we're surrounded with at this point, almost seem to evolve themselves using us as a medium rather than as, you know, us affecting them. Right, which is a horrifying concept, and like as AI starts popping off, that's gonna get weird. So at Area 1, we're trying to identify these sorts of sets of behavior on the internet, right? Because we don't care about what was happening. We don't care about what was happening over there. Like that doesn't matter to us. Like figuring out the malware, none of the payloads matter to us. We don't care about any of that because it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. What matters is this. So we're trying to identify these stages, these patterns. And for a lot of it, that's phishing. And so a lot of our system is, you know, designed to catch phishing and to identify sets of patterns and sets of relationships that we associate with phishing. And so we ingest billions of events a day from all over the internet. And what we're trying to do is build a sense-making system, which is different than an analytic system, right? Analysis as an idea, right, is about cutting things up, right? It's about summarizing it. It's about reduction. You know, you have something big and you want to make it small. What we have is a lot of big stuff, and then we want to make it even bigger, right? We want to synthesize and like form the connections. So this is a great story about like what a sense-making system is. Please read it. But a sense-making system is basically something that recognizes that no one event, no one instance, no one observation is really that meaningful, right? And especially in our context, right? We're looking for the invocation of certain behavioral scripts that we know these attackers use. And so we need to look at data over time, and we need to look at the interrelations between data that do not seem to be apparently related. Right, it's a hard and weird problem. And we do like a lot of sort of reactive programming, if people are familiar with that, to like kind of get it to work, like where we're reacting to things on the event stream to like incorporate new knowledge into our thing. But at the end of the day, our sort of like approach to the machine learning problem isn't so much to approach it as a machine learning problem, because I think it's a bogus metaphor, right? We think of it as a machine teaching program, right? We are the educators here. So this is some relationship advice. Don't ask your machine what it can do, what it can tell you. Ask yourself what you can tell it, right? You are the teacher in this relationship between you and the machine, right? It doesn't learn by itself. It can't, you know? You need to feed it, right? And that's not just a, it would be like pithy and unwise to consider that just a like, I need to give it more data, or I need to engineer more features, or like, I need a bigger recurrent neural net, you know? Because like, the models themselves almost don't matter, and like the data doesn't matter in some ways. Like it does, obviously. That's why we're here. The data matters. But the questions you ask matter more, right? And like I encourage you to question the questions you're asking and see if you're falling into certain traps, right? So 1957, Pólya wrote this, he's a mathematician, wrote this amazing book called How to Solve It, which I encourage you to read. Marvin Minsky said that anyone in AI should read it, so Marvin Minsky's right. So go read it, go buy it. It's on Amazon. But he outlined this sort of framework for solving problems, right? He has a script for solving problems. Understand it, make a plan, do it, and kind of reflect on it, right? And I think the most important part of this problem is understanding the problem, right? It's trying to figure out ways you can redefine it. So he had a couple guidelines for doing that. And when you're asking questions, you're trying to get a machine to learn something for you. When you're trying to teach a machine something, you need to figure out ways to ask new questions of it, right? Questions that that you don't think it will be able to answer correctly, or questions that you don't know are meaningful even, you know? In a sense-making system, you're trying to find insight in using your own curiosity, right? Your curiosity should guide you, right? You can't let the models guide you. Because at the end of the day, like, while I was a mathematician, I've looked at the math behind backpropagation. I think it's like looking into the face of God, not because like it's beautiful, but because it's inscrutable and horrifying. And like I feel like sometimes we get hung up on the models, and what we really need to get hung up on are the questions we're asking, right? And trying to invert those and redefine those. So Pólya has a few ways to do this. Ask yourself what you want to find. Try to restate the problem. Draw a picture of the problem. Do you have enough data? Do you actually understand what you are asking? Which I think is the hardest thing, Do you actually know what you want to find? And do you need to ask someone else a question, right? Do you need to invoke an expert? And you'll notice that all of these are different methods of redefining the problem, right? Redefining your statement. In the last talk, they talked about picking their sort of success criteria, right? And picking their problem statement and keeping it in scope. And you should always do that, right? But what I would encourage you to do is ask questions and like have success criteria that you are almost sure will fail. Because that's where you're going to find new interesting things. And that's where we found new interesting things. And Pólya also recommends a set of heuristics to use for asking new questions. Form analogies, make generalizations, vary the problem, make auxiliary problems, find related problems, decompose your problems, right? These are all ways of finding new problems, right? Like you have to let your curiosity guide you. You have to build new analogies and new metaphors to help you understand, right? Some metaphors are failures. The wall metaphor is a failure. It's a failed analogy, right? And trying to find ways to break down the metaphors, to break down the scripts that you know will work, is going to be productive for you. It's been productive for us. So what I would recommend is that you stop trying to make everything make sense, and you leave your scripts behind. One of the interesting things I find at conferences like this is that we're trying to share new scripts. We're trying to share a lot of things that we've learned that have been effective at our organizations or in our work. And that's awesome because you learn new things and you learn new ways to conduct yourselves. But sometimes always following the same scripts is limiting. Always using a random forest is limiting. Always following the same steps you do to solve a problem is limiting. And most often, especially in cybersecurity, what you need to do with the data is to get lost, right? You need to get scared of it, because it expands your worldview to really be overwhelmed, right? And it forces you to ask new questions. It forces you to find new problems. And it forces you to make sense of things in a different way. So I'll leave you with this quote. Thomas did not realize at the time that metaphors are dangerous. Metaphors are not to be trifled with. A single metaphor can give birth to love. From The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Thank you. Questions?
Thanks, Peter. Responses, questions. Let's go first here to Roy and then we'll come to you.
Thank you. First of all, a comment. I like the slide you had with the analogies between the old world communication, new world communications. But there's some little. We were ignoring something pretty important there because I'm sure my house, I leave my window open and my door is, a schlag, really easy to break through. I mean, my house is not that secured. Mm-hmm. But there is police and there's the judiciary and there's the law, and that mm-hmm. puts enough fear in some of the hearts and of the people who want to break in, and it creates some balance of terror between the two parties. But on the internet, you have people that that are very hard or impossible to reach, mm-hmm. because my door is all of a sudden open to pretty much every hacker in the world, any place in the world. My question, though, is has anyone tried to detect patterns of an infected computer, that's trying to communicate, like a Trojan or someone trying, because it's so slow, everything is so slow, it goes through all these relays and and
yeah, no, it's like kind of trivial to do, right? Like most malware, so this is going to get like, I didn't want to do too much cybersecurity stuff because it's kind of boring. But most malware will phone home every once in a while. So it'll be like, hey, I'm still alive. I still own this machine. Do you have any new instructions for me? And that's pretty easy to pick up, right? You're just looking for like repeated events in a sequence, and there are pretty simple ways to do that. They loosely randomize, but like the hackers are just people and they're lazy, like all engineers. So the randomization is kind of weak. So it's pretty easy to pick that stuff out, and we do look for things like that. Like at Area 1, we look more at the nexus of all those interacting things, right?
Yeah, just over here.
Oh, sorry.
On one of your slides, you had the point which I really relate to, which is, what if you don't understand the question that you're asking? Mm-hmm. And I often find that myself, I'm not understanding it. And then my question is, what do you then do if you don't understand the question?
Ask another question. Ask harder questions, right? Not because you don't understand it, but try to think of a related question, right? Or vary the question. You try to generalize, form a new analogy, make a new metaphor, right? For us, like on your point almost, we consider our company, so there are cybersecurity companies that try to act as a police force for the internet, and they have all failed, just kind of like the police forces in America have largely failed. But we try to act more as a bodyguard for our clients, and like thinking of the relationship differently changes what we want to do. So I would encourage like everyone to just like think of new metaphors for what they're trying to do, right? Analogy is, I think, what we're best at as a species. It's drawing those connections, and it'll lead you to new and interesting problems. So that may solve more than what you originally wanted to solve, I'll add.
Hey, the social engineering that we see going on where companies are losing money to these fraudsters is pretty sophisticated and amazing, and kind of scary. I heard about a story about these fraudsters who had infiltrated a company, had known so much about the employees. They pretended there was someone who was in Hawaii vacationing. They said everything's great here, Hawaii's great, and they knew the stories about all the employees. It's amazing that as we move forward and we are on the internet all the time, we fail to pick up the phone and verify any of this information, and that a ton of money is moving forward, and it really it makes me think, not if we are all individually going to be trapped by the social engineering, but just when. So like, what's the kind of most amazing story you've heard so far? All
the stories are for me super simple. So like the social engineering stuff in general is more or less what you outlined, but doing research on any individual is pretty easy at this point, right? Like I'm guessing everyone here has a LinkedIn. I can probably figure out where you worked. I can probably figure out who you're connected to. And that's just by like Googling around, For for sophisticated, nation-state level cyber actors, the Googling around step is, part of their full-time job, right? So it's pretty easy for them to get in. Still, there are like ways to sort of predict and preempt what they're doing in a lot of ways, just because the script they're going to follow, right? The wildest story, though. Let's think of a good one.
Okay, and we'll make this the final story because I want to get Tristan up and set up for his conversation at 4:30. So
okay, sorry.
Yeah,
all right, like 30 seconds. These guys wanted to knock over a oil and gas something that had a bunch of people who work at it, and so they found the Chinese restaurant down the block from their office and realized that their site was an old WordPress thing, so they hacked the WordPress site and replaced their menu was a PDF. So they replaced the menu with a PDF with an embedded, piece of malware, an embedded virus in it. So the next time someone ordered Chinese from there and downloaded the menu, they had owned the oil and gas company. So that was kind of a fun one. I thought that was clever. I was like, bravo. You know, like, not bad. Not bad. So, thank you.
All right.